Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like we're diving into some Thanksgiving history this time. And you even brought some great sources from Mount Vernon to help us out. You know, Thanksgiving always makes me think of pilgrims and turkey, but I bet there's more to it than I know.
You're right about that. Thanksgiving as we celebrate it today, well, it evolved over centuries, and it's way more complex and interesting than most people realize.
That's what I was hoping to hear. So, those really early Thanksgiving observances, before it was a national holiday, what can you tell us about them?
Well, before we get to a national holiday, we have to remember giving thanks wasn't a new idea for the colonists. They were used to, days of prayer and fasting and Thanksgiving, all tied to specific events.
Okay, so it wasn't like they just decided to have a feast out of nowhere.
Right. More intentional, connected to, their religious beliefs and community.
Makes sense.
And that brings us to, well, the story everyone knows. The 1621 Plymouth Thanksgiving, with the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag. Now, what's interesting is that this gathering, as important as it wasn't actually the start of a yearly Thanksgiving thing.
Wait, really? I always thought that was the whole origin story.
It's definitely part of the story, but it wasn't an annual event, just a one-time thing.
So if the 1621 feast wasn't the start, how did Thanksgiving evolve? I'm guessing it didn't just become a national holiday overnight.
Nope. You're on the right track there. Over time, Thanksgiving changed and meant different things. During the Revolution, colonial legislatures often declared days of Thanksgiving, but to mark military victories against the British.
So Thanksgiving became a way to boost morale, celebrate those wins during the war.
Exactly, and that's where George Washington comes in.
Okay, I was wondering when he'd show up. This is where things get really interesting for me. We've got these sources from Mount Vernon, his home. I'm ready to hear more about his connection to Thanksgiving.
Well, after the American victory at Saratoga, in 1777, Washington, as commander of the Continental Army, declared December 18th a national day of Thanksgiving. It wasn't just local, he was calling for the whole nation to take part. First time that ever happened.
That's a pretty big step. I mean, the country was so new then. What was the reaction to this national Thanksgiving? Did people actually celebrate?
Tough to say for sure how widespread it was, but this proclamation, it was definitely a big moment, shows how Washington saw, the power of a shared national observance, especially during a war.
It makes you wonder what he was thinking when he made that decision. Was it, just strategic, or did he really believe in giving thanks as a nation?
Great question, and it's something historians still debate, probably a mix of things. But no matter his reasons, Washington set a precedent. The Continental Congress kept issuing those Thanksgiving proclamations until 1784, even after the war ended.
So even before the Constitution, there's a sense of national unity around Thanksgiving, at least for a bit. And I guess that takes us to Washington's presidency and the sources you have from Mount Vernon. What do they tell us?
Yes, now it's 1789, and you could call this one of the biggest moments in Thanksgiving history. This year, Congress asked President Washington to declare Thanksgiving Day to celebrate the ratification of the new Constitution.
A Thanksgiving for the Constitution. That makes sense. Given how big a deal that was, what did Washington do?
He agreed, of course. On October 3rd, 1789, Washington made a proclamation, set Thursday, November 26th, as a National Day of Thanks. In his proclamation, which you have in your materials, he really emphasized gratitude for American independence and for this new government. And he didn't just, issue it, he promoted it, sent it to all the governors, urged them to get people participating in their states.
So he wasn't just going through the motions. Sounds like he really wanted this to be a national thing. Did people respond?
They did. Newspapers all over the new nation printed the proclamation, and there are accounts of public celebrations in all sorts of cities and towns. And what's cool is we know Washington himself went to services at St. Paul's Chapel in New York City, the capital back then. He even donated food and beer to people in need. Imprisoned debtors, specifically.
That's a part of the story I hadn't heard before. Sounds like he was committed to making this a meaningful day for everyone, not just a symbol.
Exactly. Washington's actions, they show you how he saw Thanksgiving, its role in creating unity and gratitude in the new nation. But like I said, there's more to the Thanksgiving story. A few more twists and turns before it becomes the holiday we know today.
All right, ready to uncover more of this Thanksgiving history?
Absolutely. We just heard about Washington's Thanksgiving. But you said there are more twists and turns, so where do we go from here?
Well, you probably guess it. Washington's proclamation in 1789, it didn't just magically make Thanksgiving a permanent holiday. Not the one we know today, anyway.
So even with Washington behind it, it wasn't a done deal. Why not? Well, think about it. The United States was still brand new back then. figuring things out. There were debates, about federal holidays. And some people, they thought Thanksgiving was too religious to be a national thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. There was that strong feeling about separation of church and state. So what happened to Thanksgiving after Washington's presidency? Did it just disappear?
Not completely. Washington actually declared another Thanksgiving in 1795, and later presidents did too. But there wasn't a set date or anything, and it wasn't every year. It really depended, on the president and what was going on at the time. Sometimes it was for military victory, sometimes for national crises, or even just calls for unity.
So Thanksgiving was kind of like a tool presidents could use when they felt like it. But how did it go from these random proclamations to the annual tradition we know now? Who made that happen?
Well, a few people were important, but maybe the most influential in this part of Thanksgiving history was Abraham Lincoln.
Lincoln. Wow. I hadn't thought about him in all this. What did he do?
Okay, so Lincoln's presidency, it happened during a really tough time, the Civil War. And in 1863, right in the middle of that war, Lincoln issued a Thanksgiving proclamation, a really important one. He called for a national Thanksgiving on the last Thursday in November. And he said it was a time for all Americans, North and South, everyone, to come together, be grateful for the nation's blessings, even with the war going on.
That must have been a powerful message back then, trying to find common ground, unity, during such a divided time.
Exactly. Lincoln's 1863 proclamation, it changed things. It helped make Thanksgiving a national holiday on a specific date, and it became about reflection, reconciliation, gratitude, even when things were hard.
So Lincoln really shaped Thanksgiving into what it is today.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't officially a federal holiday then, right?
Right. That came later. But Lincoln's proclamations, they set the stage, and we can't forget Sarah Josepha Hale.
Who was that? I've never heard that name before in connection with Thanksgiving.
So, Sarah Josepha Hale, she was a magazine editor. She edited Godey's Ladies' Book, which was really popular then, and she was a big advocate for a national Thanksgiving holiday, campaigned for it for decades, writing letters to presidents, governors, even Congress, urging them to make Thanksgiving permanent.
Wow. She sounds like she didn't mess around.
Yeah.
So it was Lincoln's proclamations and then her push that really made Thanksgiving important.
Yeah. And then finally, 1941, Congress made it official, Thanksgiving, a federal holiday, on the fourth Thursday in November. Thanks to both of them, really.
So it took a Civil War president, a determined magazine editor, and a few decades to make Thanksgiving what it is. It's amazing how much work went into this holiday we just take for granted now.
It really shows you how much Thanksgiving meant to Americans. Even before it was official, it was about gratitude, unity, reflection, things that were more important than politics.
That's a good point. It says something about America, But I'm curious, once it became a federal holiday, did that change how people celebrated? Did it get more commercialized?
Sure.
Or lose some of its original meaning?
That's a really great question. And to answer it, we have to look at what happened next. The 20th century, and even now, how Thanksgiving kept changing and adapting to America.
Okay, let's hear it. I'm ready for the next chapter. This Thanksgiving history is fascinating.
Well, it's quite a story, right? And as you said, it doesn't end there. In the 20th century, Thanksgiving kept evolving, changing with America's culture and society.
So how did becoming a federal holiday change Thanksgiving?
Well, one thing, it made the date official. The fourth Thursday in November. That meant the whole nation celebrate on the same day, families and communities everywhere, all together.
Makes sense. But did it change the way people celebrated? Did it become more, commercial?
It definitely affected how Thanksgiving traditions developed. Mass media, radio and television. In the 20th century, they played a big role. We started seeing all these images of families gathered around big tables full of food. And that idea, the big Thanksgiving feast, became like the main part of the holiday.
So the media created this perfect image of Thanksgiving that everyone wanted.
Exactly. And as the 20th century went on, Thanksgiving got more and more connected to consumerism. You had Black Friday right after Thanksgiving, kicking off the holiday shopping. And the focus on food just got bigger. Grocery stores, food companies, they all pushed these elaborate Thanksgiving meals.
It's interesting how Thanksgiving went from being about reflection and gratitude to being about shopping and eating. But it sounds like those original values are still there, even if they're not always the main focus.
Oh, absolutely. Thanksgiving is still about families and friends coming together, sharing a meal, expressing gratitude. And even with its, complicated history, it's a chance to think about what we share as a nation, our history and values.
As we've been talking, I've been thinking about those sources from Mount Vernon. It's interesting to imagine how Washington would see Thanksgiving today. I mean, he was so important in the early celebrations.
That's a really interesting thought. We can't know for sure, of course, but I think he'd be amazed by how Thanksgiving has lasted and how it's changed over time. He might be surprised by how big it is now and all the commercial stuff. But I think deep down, he'd still see that spirit of gratitude and unity, the things he really believed in.
I think you're right. And that brings us back to you, our listener. We started this deep dive because you wanted to know about Thanksgiving history, and we've learned some surprising things. What are some things that stood out to you? What surprised you the most?
And how has this changed how you see this holiday, how we think about Thanksgiving?
As you get together with your family and friends this Thanksgiving, think about how this holiday got to your table. It's been a long journey. Remember the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag, Washington's proclamations, Lincoln's call for unity, and Sarah Joseph Hale, who never gave up. Think about how Thanksgiving has changed, how it reflects America's changes, and what it means to you now in the 21st century. Thank you for joining us on this Thanksgiving Deep Dive. We hope you found a new appreciation for this amazing holiday and all its complexity. Until next time, happy Thanksgiving. Welcome back. We've been on quite a journey through Thanksgiving history, from those early colonial days to Washington and Lincoln, and even that magazine editor who wouldn't quit.
It's really something, isn't it? And like you said before, there's still more to the story. In the 20th century, Thanksgiving kept changing, adapting to America.
So becoming a federal holiday, how did that change things?
Well, first off, it set the date for good, the fourth Thursday in November, so the whole country celebrated together, families, communities, all on the same day.
Right. But did it change how people celebrated? Did it become, well, more commercialized?
Oh, it definitely changed how Thanksgiving traditions developed. Mass media had a big impact, radio and TV especially. In the 20th century, everyone started seeing those images. Happy families, huge tables full of food, and that whole idea of big Thanksgiving feast, it became the main event.
So the media created this perfect Thanksgiving picture that everyone tried to copy.
Yeah, exactly. And as the 20th century went on, Thanksgiving and consumerism, they got more and more connected. You had Black Friday the day after, kicking off all that holiday shopping. And the focus on food, it just exploded. Grocery stores, food companies, they all wanted you to have this giant Thanksgiving meal.
It's interesting how Thanksgiving changed, from a day about gratitude and reflection to this huge shopping and eating event. But it seems like those original values are still there, even if they're not always front and center.
Definitely. Thanksgiving is still about families and friends getting together, sharing food, being grateful. And even though it has this, well, kind of messy history, it's still a chance to think about what we share as Americans, our history, our values.
While we've been talking, I keep thinking about those sources from Mount Vernon. I wonder what Washington would think about Thanksgiving today. He was so important in those early celebrations.
That's a great question. I mean, we can't really know, but I bet he'd be amazed by how Thanksgiving has stuck around and all the ways it's changed. He might be surprised by how big it is now, all the commercial stuff, but I think he'd still see that spirit of gratitude and unity, the things that mattered most to him.
I think you're right. And that brings us back to you, our listener. This whole deep dive started with you wanting to know about Thanksgiving. And we've discovered some pretty surprising stuff along the way. What stood out to you? What surprised you the most?
Yeah, and how has this changed how you think about Thanksgiving?
So this Thanksgiving, when you're with your loved ones, think about how this holiday got to your table. It's been a long journey. Think back to the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag. Remember Washington's proclamations and how Lincoln called for unity? And Sarah Joseph Hale, she just wouldn't give up. Remember how Thanksgiving has always been changing, reflecting America's changes. And think about what it means to you now, here in the 21st century. Thank you for coming with us on this Thanksgiving deep dive. We hope you found a new appreciation for this holiday. Happy Thanksgiving.